Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to All Things Avennia. Thanks so much for being here. It is May 13th, so we are almost done with this first iteration of All Things Avennia, with just a couple more episodes coming up. But today is our last interview. So I've done a couple interviews in a row now, but I'm very excited to have Lacey Lybeck here from Sagemoor Vineyards, who is going to be talking to us about sort of her background in viticulture and the vineyards over there in general, but also maybe get to answer some questions, some geeky questions about all those things. So, Lacey, thanks so much for being here, and welcome to All Things Venia.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share about Sagemoor Vineyards, our beautiful sites here in Eastern Washington, just north of Pasco.
Yeah. So, and before we get into Sagemoor stuff, I was hoping you could just start and tell a little bit about your background, because I know you grew up in a farming family. Actually, you grew up is it in LaConner or up in near Mount Vernon? Is that true? Which, by the way, is one of my favorite places to visit. I love going up to Mount Vernon and the whole Skagit Valley and doing those things. LaConner is a favorite little village of my family. But yeah, tell me a little bit about your background there and then in going to school after that.
Definitely. I did grow up in LaConner. I was fortunate enough to be raised in the small town of LaConner. I graduated high school with 37 people, believe it or not, and grew up in a farm family. So I remember jumping in the pickup with my grandpa and measuring fields. To in high school, my girlfriend Carly would join me, and we would be sorting daffodil bulbs from dirt clods. So definitely love farming and got it in my blood. I knew that I wanted to study agriculture and went to Washington State University after graduating from LaConner. So I was sitting in a 100 level crops class, and they started sharing about wine grapes, and I fell in love with how grapes really tell a story about both the year that they were raised in, the place that they are grown in, how they really the team can express that site, and how it's all bottled up and captured for the year to be revisited. So I just thought that was so cool and started down the path of studying wine. And as you know, once you catch the bug, it's fun where wine education can take you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so then when you started just was you studying ag in general, and then did you go into a wine focus, or did you keep studying sort of what was your degree in, like, so where did that take you?
Definitely. My degree was in agriculture food systems with a minor in viticulture and enology. Um, I really found a passion for also soil science and kind of studied a lot about soil texture as well. Um, in my studies, I knew that I wanted to kind of understand what working at a winery was like. So I graduated with a degree in December in agriculture and packed my bags and moved to New Zealand for a little bit. So I kind of got to drag around winery hoses, see what fruit is like being received at a winery, understand all the pieces that harvest can really, the things that can go wrong, what like works really well when things go well, how providing clean fruit to a winery can just start the wine off on the right foot. So
New Zealand, were you?
I was down there at a custom crush facility called Indivan in 2011. So looking at a lot of Pinot Noir and Sauvignon Blanc.
Wow, that's
But came back to Washington, which I've always loved Washington State. Pasco and the Tri-Cities is an excellent area for growing grapes, and um, it's been fun to get to know the wine growing regions of Washington State. They're so unique.
yeah. And so, did you have other experiences when you got back to Washington before you got to Sagemoor, which was in 2015? Is that when you started there?
Hmm.
Did you do, where else did you go in Washington, or did you work with any other vineyards or any other places then?
Hmm. I was fortunate enough to work for St. Michel Wine Estates. So you guys in Woodinville know Chateau St. Michel pretty well. And um, they source wine grapes from over 60% of Washington State. So as a viticulture intern, I was riding an ATV through 30 different growers' vineyards, getting to see, what happens when you leave the water on a little too long, or when someone misses an irrigation set. Um, Really getting to observe what Washington brings to different flavors and taste fruit from all the different AVAs. I was fortunate to get to work in 8 different AVAs in Washington State before joining the team at Sagemoor.
Wow. And so, and Sagemoor is just because I know that the bulk of the vineyards are right there north of Pasco, where you are, sort of up on the Columbia River in Columbia Valley AVA. But then you also have one in Walluk. But what's sort of the now, if you want to start talking about Sagemoor and just how that got set up and where they cover?
Definitely. The story of Sagemoor really begins in the really beginning days of Washington wine. The first vineyards were planted in 1972 at the advice of Walter Clore. Walter Clore really scouted Sagemoor, Bacchus, and Dionysus, and they were planted by a partnership out of Seattle. Over 60 individuals thought it was a great idea to expand the acreage of Washington wine, and in that time they doubled production. So 350 acres of wine grapes went into the ground. We still manage many of those original plantings of Cabernet Sauvignon and Sauvignon Blanc to this day, some of which goes into Chris and the team's hands at Avennia.
Yeah. Oh man, we love that fruit. I like every year I get so excited when we get that fruit in. Also, it's one of my favorite vats or like barrels to try on its own whenever we're going through blending trials and when we get to like Dionysus and Bacchus. It's just great.
The blocks speak for themselves, and it's amazing. A few different winemakers make wine from each of these blocks, and you can tell the common flavor profile that these grapes bring to the different techniques and hands of winemakers.
Right. So you said Dionysus, Bacchus, and Sagemoor. What are the other vineyards that you have that you're working with now through the overarching Sagemoor vineyards?
Mm-hmm. Weinbau Vineyard on the Wallach Slope was added during the 1980s. It's really the Wild West up outside of Mattawa, Washington. Blink and you'll miss it. It's really in the middle of nowhere, but it is home for beautiful Italian varieties and big, bold Cabernet. Cabernet Franc also excels up at Weinbau Vineyard, and it's an area that the tannins can be really big and expressive, but with the right winemaking guidance, there's some beautiful wines. And then Grenache Vineyard, we added to our portfolio in 2016. So it was planted in the mid 80s by the Grenache brothers, Bob and Roger, and we were fortunate enough to purchase the site, and we've really been getting to know it. It's another that has beautiful mid-season reds, really soft texture, which is different than Weinbau, and fun to offer. It's got this caliche, which is a hard pan of calcium that is really difficult to stick trellis into, hard to get vines established, but that calcium really leads to deep, rich color expression in the red wines.
That's so cool. Yeah, I didn't even realize that you had Gamache, that or you had acquired it because I was familiar with that before 2016. So it was cool to see that that's all part of the family now. That's awesome. Well,
Definitely, and we love honoring the legacy of the vineyard sites, as well as the legacy of our team. I think we'll get to share a picture in a little bit, but I get to work with people who have been tending the vines. One of our employees, Miguel de la Mora, he's been on the site for over 45 years. This was his 45th anniversary with the company. So a lot of my job is learning from these individuals who have been really meticulously scaping and tending to these vines for years.
totally. That's so cool. So okay, so this I feel like this is always kind of like a cliche question, but it is something I'm really interested in, is sort of like the day in the life, because you're a vineyard manager, and I think for a lot of people it's hard to know or to tell what that entails, especially when you're covering such a wide area. Because I mean, each vineyard is fairly large. There's a lot of acreage. So what is it that you do? But then also particularly now, sort of this time of year, in middle of May, in what's happening with the vineyards now.
Definitely. Day to day, starting off with our team, we're leading a group of 45, 50 individuals during this time of the year working through shoot thinning. So we're identifying our best places to be able to target our labor and our team to um, express and coax out the flavor each year, and also make sure that beautiful Eastern Washington sunlight is getting onto the fruit. Um, it's exciting. Our viticulture technician will start on next year. So I'll be working with our team member, Jose, who's graduating from Washington State University, completing our crop estimation. It's a big piece of knowing what we're going to send in to winemakers for the year and building our crop. So we're really going out there and counting each cluster on certain vines, being able to make a prediction of how many tons per acre we're going to be able to pick and send in to our winemakers. It's fun. Each year we're doing the same or similar activities in the vineyard, but every year we're making changes because the seasons can be different. So far this year has been warm, which we all expected with the snow that we had. And if you drove over Snoqualmie Pass at all this winter, there was a lot of snow. But things have been warm. We've been shaping up close to 2018, which has been nice. And the vines have been loving the heat. So,
well, I was hoping you could share your screen and maybe show some of these pictures of both your team and then and these vineyards and what you're seeing right now.
awesome. I pulled out a picture from the archives of our team out at Bacchus Vineyard. So this is our year-round team that finished the season with us in 2019. It's amazing. Our team that prunes the vines really knows how to shape and be able to leaf and expose those clusters. And we're also going through and either hand picking the clusters or working with selected machines to deliver them to winemakers. And that's really the winemaker's decision, how they would like the fruit. But to give you an idea of where our vineyards are located, we are here in the north of the Tri-Cities. Sagemoor, Bacchus, Dionysus, and Grenache are all located in the soon-to-be-announced White Bluffs AVA.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because I remember there's a few like that were waiting to be approved, and I didn't know if it's being approved now. Do we have word of that?
We have heard that we should be hearing something soon.
That's so exciting.
So I know it's coming soon, and it's such a unique viticulture area. When we were working with Kevin Pogue to really understand the viticulture of the White Bluffs and what makes it unique, it's it is the only viticulture area in Washington State where the vines do not have any influence with our bedrock here, which is basalt.
Really? Okay. That's interesting because we did a episode. I did a little overview of the Missoula floods before and learning about like the basalt foundation and then sort of some of the soils on top of it. But I didn't realize that so you don't even get to the basalt layer in the bluffs or in your vineyards.
Mm-hmm. The Glacial Lake Lewis was slow enough in the area that we're at that we've got lots of lake deposits and several feet before we hit any bedrock.
Cool. Super cool.
Location. To give a visual of the White Bluffs, as you can see, following the Columbia River, just the beautiful calcification, white appearance of the soil that is the namesake. So in the foreground of this picture is Bacchus Vineyard and Dionysus Vineyard behind the red barn. I just love this aerial because you can really see the tabletop and southwest aspect these vineyards have. They have excellent air drainage, which is amazing during our harvest days where we've got a large diurnal shift. The story of Washington wine, right? Missoula floods and diurnal shift.
Yeah.
So not too long ago, we were hitting 80 during the day and then getting to 40 degrees at night. So
Wow.
awesome for ripening grapes during the harvest time frame and during the fall.
And you were saying that it was pretty windy in the vineyards too. And is that sort of just a direct result of where you are being close to the water, but also like the plain next to the water?
Definitely. The White Bluffs provide a breeze, that waterway right there. And It's excellent for wine grapes. We love having a nice airflow going through the canopy. It really reduces disease pressure, allows us to use less inputs. And really that constant airflow just helps the grapes to ripen evenly and create the dense and thick skins that we love for Cabernet. Big, expressive wines. And then Cabernet Franc is a really unique block that we've got at Bacchus. It's one that is really on a hillside. It is, let's see if I can, oh, well, I skipped forward. But as you go down the hillside, the wines become more and more savory. And so it's so fun because the rows that Avennia has and Chris works with, we've identified a little bit more of a savory characteristic that matches his wine style. And being able to farm for that wine style in the vineyard.
And are these like those vines look pretty old? Are these the 72 or 73 plantings?
Yeah, these are the 1973 Dionysus Block 16A Cab Sauv. This was just a little bit earlier today in the vineyard, so you can see our canopy is a little bit less than halfway to the size we'd like it to be. During this time of the season, we're really pushing the vines with nutrition as well as irrigation to ensure that we've got a full canopy to ripen our desired crop. Vines love to grow, and so part of that is also going through and controlling how much water the vines have access to. As well as we've got some fun tools up our belt to kind of control vine growth. We've gone through and found utilizing undervine cultivation, really allowing the vine's roots to feel that water stress, open up and dry out the soil, can help us to control growth and vigor.
Is that related to RDI or the reduced deficit irrigation? Is that basically the same thing, or is that a different process?
We will begin the reduced deficit irrigation after fruit set. Right now, we are giving the vines as much as they need to continue growing at an even pace. But each year is different. This winter, we did not have a lot of soil moisture here in Pasco. Where two winters ago, we had almost 18 inches of snow that melted very slowly. And so we had quite a bit of moisture. And we, in 2019, at this time in May, had just done one irrigation set, where at present we've been irrigating 2 to 3 times per day or per week, depending on variety, since April.
Wow. That's so cool.
But you can see these trunks have never been cut to the ground. So it really speaks to the location of the vineyard, to that effect that the river has in just maintaining good air temperature and allowing cold air to move through. So these vines produce a little over 3 tons per acre. We will make 7 to 8 passes with our team, just manicuring these vines to ensure sunlight penetration, that really we want sunlight to evenly hit each cluster and ensure we've got a beautiful, unique crop to deliver each year.
That's 3,000 tons an acre seems like pretty good for old vine cab. Like I feel like, or just for old vines in general. I feel like I hear about old vines where yields go down to 2, even like 1,000 or 1,500 tons an acre. So that's still producing like quite a lot of fruit. Is that fair to say?
Definitely. With 3.25 ton per acre, we are looking at something like 40 clusters per vine for these vines, to kind of think about, to put that into what you would see on a vine. And really it speaks to the time and attention these vines have received. So our team going through and hand pruning, we're tying and retraining the arms and being able to just really maintain the space for these vines. One thing that is neat that I did not add a picture of is our layering technique, where this vineyard site, one reason these vines have gotten to the age they are is the site is own rooted and phylloxera free. So when we have a vine that maybe is injured by a tractor or is lost for some other reason, we're able to train down from a neighboring vine and be able to reestablish a vine in its spot.
So that's so fascinating. Can you take that and explain it a little bit more? So when you mean train down, you basically mean like you can take like a vine and just sort of stick it in the ground, and then that the next year it'll sprout again, or how does that work?
Yeah, it takes a couple of years. So it's a process that about 5 years you'll be able to refill in the hole. But what we do is take one of these newly emerged shoots and begin training it so that it makes its journey down towards the ground. It'll take about 2 years for it to grow long enough to be buried. And then we bury 6 to 8 inches of the cane, make a U, and grapes will send out roots. So that's what's fascinating is that will become its own vine. We then start training it up as if it's its own vine, but keep it attached to the mother plant. The network of root systems of the root system in this vine, in this vineyard block, is so expansive that if we were to simply plant a new vine, it would not be able to compete with these old vines next to it. So by connecting a vine and training it down, but keeping it attached to the mother vine's root system, we're able to establish a new vine without having it compete with what's around it.
That's fascinating. I think I had heard that or read it at some point and just never really understood it, but that's really cool. Wow.
It's really neat, and it's a regenerative process. Each year we're going in and spending time to identify where we've got some gaps, maybe retrain where these vines were planted on a very wide system compared to what we're replanting with now. For example, these are planted to 545 vines per acre, where our new planting next door, we're planting at 1361.
Wow.
So over twice as many vines.
Wow. Wow. And the stuff that you're planting now, are you using rootstock with that, or in selecting like very particular rootstock for the site?
We are looking at rootstock moving forward. However, these plantings at Bacchus and Dionysus are on their own roots.
Cool. That's so cool.
Yeah, we are, with the news kind of recently discovered in Washington state of phylloxera, we've been out with our management team just ground truthing our vines with a fine-tooth comb, looking at our root system. It sometimes feels like looking for a needle in a haystack, but it's, I think, good that it feels that way, right? But yeah, it's so much fun to manage these old vines. They are definitely a unique challenge. You'll notice in our vines we have native alfalfa that grows. The circle before being planted to wine grapes in the late 60s was alfalfa. So some of this could be remnant from that, but alfalfa fixes nitrogen and really creates a dense root system. So we love nurturing those and really waiting to do inputs such as mowing and cultivating until we need to be able to harvest clean fruit. And then we will go through and mow and remove some of the debris. That way we ensure that it doesn't make it in the fruit to the hands of the winemaker.
Yeah. And is that also just because if the alfalfa or whatever crops in between vines, is it because they can grow to the point where they're just like literally touching fruit or like in waving in the breeze against any of the clusters, or is it more of just like a movement through the vineyards and kicking up things into the grapes?
Definitely movement through the vineyards and kicking up grapes. However, there are some weeds that will grow into your fruit system and fruiting zone and cause issues. Mare's tail is one I can think of that will grow 4 feet tall, and no winemaker wants to see seeds from a weed in with their wine grapes. It's such a fun time of the year, but it's also our biggest challenge. It's um, we're harvesting fruit and sending it to winemakers throughout the state of Washington. Some, as close as Walla Walla here in Richland and Tri-Cities, up to Spokane, and even to Woodinville. So we're sending these trucks on refrigerated, or sending the fruit in refrigerated trailers and making sure the fruit is perfectly picked, ready to make the journey and um, arrive in beautiful shape.
Love it.
So it's fun. A lot of the time during harvest, we're kind of walking side by side, tasting vines, tasting the fruit, and being able to taste kind of the acidity and how bright the fruit tastes, fruit flavors, and how that might express in the wine, and kind of how the vines are trending, how many bricks or degrees of sugar per week those vines are getting.
Mhm. You just took these pictures today. Is that these
Yeah, with my iPhone, isn't that neat?
camera shots? I feel like you should charge people and like they could put this on their websites. This is so great. These are good pictures.
It's just so fun to see these like gnarly old vines, these just massive um, trunks. All they've weathered in their almost 50 years. Next year will be 50 years.
Wow.
Standing guard at Dionysus.
Are you planning any like 50-year party or anniversary?
We need to. I think everyone who's in the original plantings we should have a big dinner,
Yeah. Okay. I'll get Chris on it. We'll make it happen.
right?
Oh, these are so cool.
And
Oh,
then here is where we are in kind of grape berry development. These will become the flowers for this year's crop. Um, I always think it's funny. We've got some cherries at our ranch here at Sagemoor Vineyards, and they will be picked and ready to eat before wine grapes even bloom and have fruit on the vine. So each inflorescence, each little cap will bloom and become a flower, which becomes a berry. It's so much fun to start to see the crop kind of unfold out in the vineyard.
so at this time, so now we're getting close to flower. So when you're looking at this cluster, so what are you thinking? How many days or weeks are we out from flowering, from when those will actually present as blooms?
Mm-hmm. I most likely this will bloom mid-June,
Okay.
somewhere around June 10th, June 11th, maybe a little later. We are right now going through and counting these inflorescence to start getting a pulse on what our crop load looks like. I like to use, anywhere from a 5 to a 10% buffer, depending on how much I know that block has moved in the past few years on cluster weight at harvest time. So we're really identifying how many clusters we want per vine as we're going through with our team and shoot thinning and ensuring we're close to that target.
Right. So that was a question because you had mentioned the viticultural technician or like, going through and counting and trying to measure crop ahead of time. But with things like shoot removal and suckering, but also green harvesting or something like decisions you might make later on, will you keep going back and counting at different points throughout the growing season so that you get closer and closer to what the actual final tonnage is going to be?
Definitely. Each time we go through and are removing crop, we'll do a count with our team. And then our big time that we really get a pulse on how the crop is lining up with past years is at Veraison. At the color change in wine grapes, we'll go through and do a green harvest of a certain number of vines per acre, where we are taking all the fruit off that vine, weighing that fruit, and then being able to calculate how many pounds per cluster we have. Cabernet Sauvignon tends to have anywhere from 0.2 to 0.5 pounds per cluster. So 4 to 5 clusters per pound, depending on how you want to think about it. And it's really a time where we can start to see, and we know the double sigmoid curve of berry development. So we can know that in that time of 1% veraison, the vine and the berry is going to accumulate 80% more weight than it has at that point. So then it's all just a math calculation, being able to predict what the weight will be at harvest and ensure that we've got that number of clusters that we want. Because I can tell you, for this block 16A, Chris brings out 15 bins.
Yeah.
And with that, or it may be a few less than that, but winemakers bring out a very specific number of bins, and we want to ensure that the fermenters are full, so our wine club and the consumers have wine to enjoy. And it's so much fun with blending and vineyard ratios, being able to know what that acre is going to produce and how to best represent the vintage. There are years where if it's cooler, we'll adjust down and know that we want to have a little bit less crop on the vine, so that the energy that the vintage is giving is going into less fruit.
That's also just so crucial. Like now, I've worked with Avennia now for a little over 3 years, and finally seeing like the whole season and the cycle from year to year, and what you have to pay attention to when, and being able to predict how much fruit's coming in is so important, even just based on like, what's our tank space? How many barrels do we need? What's like, where physically can we put this fruit, or this, like after we like where it's fermenting based on how much we know is coming in. And when it's off, like when we think we're getting in a certain amount of tons and it ends up being 70% less, or not 70, sorry, 30% less, or just off in any way, it can really throw you. And so it's always really appreciative to hear how people are getting more and more accurate, and you guys have always been great with this too. It's nice to know, and easier for us to sort of do all things we need to do in the cellar in order to match what you guys are bringing us. But it's such a big puzzle, and I think on both sides it's just a huge puzzle. Well, so that's another question with all this, all the math and like you were saying, and trying to track things and going through and counting. Are you using specific like computer systems, or like even instruments in the vineyards that are measuring things? Like what sort of tech and computer systems are you guys utilizing at the vineyards?
Definitely. Our parent company, Allen Brothers, is amazing at really providing us with the tools that we need to be able to take the data that we're collecting and make it usable and make it available in real time for those decisions. You can collect a lot of data, but if you're not really using it in real time, it's not helpful, right? And so we've built some really cool internal systems. Our interns and teams have an app that they download onto their phone and are able to collect their cluster counts and have that data readily available. That same system then rolls up into our fruit assignments and block assignments and our grape map. We've got some blocks like at Weinbau Block 13 Cab Franc that have over 40 winemakers in that one block. And so being able to keep track of, someone may have 2 rows, someone may have 5, but being able to track customers' fruit down to that area, know through to harvest about when they want to harvest, how they want their fruit picked. If they have any constraints, like you mentioned, tank size is a huge one. We want to ensure that all the fruit that we've got delivered to somebody can be used in the best way possible, and that they know what's coming at them. We love communicating with our winemakers and telling them the conditions from the field, from anything like taking pictures and sharing it on our Instagram to sharing what we're tasting, where we think flavor's going in the field, seeing winemakers as they come through and taste their fruit. Chris and the team are out at least once a week, and as harvest gets closer, even sooner than that, or even twice a week, tasting fruit and just seeing when it's ready to be picked. Right. And start the winemaking process.
On your website, it talks about how much you like working with winemakers or talking to winemakers about like what style of wine they're looking for, and then doing your best to try to like make that happen in the vineyard. Do you notice that like, is there an overall, do you see overall trends that winemakers now are after, or is it still sort of run the gamut between really like, fresh, sort of more tension, like old world style wines, and then the super ripe, like fruity, maybe new world style? Or are you seeing any overall trends with what they want?
Hmm. We've had a lot of requests for Grenache wine grapes. I think people are really starting to realize that Washington is a beautiful home for the Rhone varieties, and I wish we had more. It's on our planting list and schedule for the future.
That's fun.
Um,
Personally, I love Grenache. I was actually telling someone today I was tasting a Grenache with, and I was like, I wish we had more Grenache in the state. So I'm all about it.
mhm. With Grenache, even other obscure varieties, we have a lot of people interested in. We planted 1 acre each of Sagrantino and Alianico at Weinbau, and they're sold out to Boudreaux Winery up in Leavenworth and Bartholomew here in Kennewick. But I would be interested to really dive in and learn more about those obscure Italian varieties.
Totally. Well, and I feel like that's a lot of people are thinking more about Italian varieties, especially Mediterranean varieties, as things get a little warmer, as that we're trying to like combat climate change and how things are adjusting and changing in the vineyards. So it's interesting to hear more about people experimenting with those varieties.
Hmm. And then we always get requests for the classics. It's funny working with winemakers. Some will try to have a wine that they love as a consumer, and that they want to source wine grapes from that wine. Um, Sometimes we'll go and even taste if a winemaker is established, and um, we want to work together, be able to taste what they've already made, what they love as their house style, and talk about blocks that naturally lean towards their house style. For example, we've got some Cabernet at Grenache Vineyard that, as we've gotten to know it, it is beautifully expressive, light in tannin, has some violet and aromatic floral components to it. And we've really been able to hone in winemakers that love that style. And someone who loves a big, expressive, bold Cabernet that they're going to age in barrel for 24 months. And it may not be for them, but it sure is fun to find the right block and the right wine style. It's almost an art,
Yeah. Oh,
matching the two.
totally. Well, and it's fun to hear growers that are interested in that too, and not just these are the grapes we're growing and see what you can do with them, but actually have it be more of like a relationship, a back and forth of style. That's so cool.
It's so fun. Plus, being able to hear what a winemaker loved about the vintage, and it brings inspiration to our whole team on how to coax out maybe those same characteristics in years to come.
Mhm. Cool. Oh yeah. So going back to our vintage, so it's 2021 now. So and we had talked about flowering. So what are over the next month then, getting to flowering and then into June? What are some of the things you are worried about, or things that you look for? Obviously, if there's weather systems or extreme cold or things like that, but specific to your site, sort of where you are, what are some of the things that you are most aware and concerned about now?
Definitely. I always laugh after we reach Mother's Day, all the grape growers in Washington state like give a big sigh of relief, because that is our classic last day that you could have frost be an issue. Knock on wood. But it's nice to have that worry behind us. And so going into the next month or two, we're really watching the weather and ensuring that we're paying attention to powdery mildew weather. Um, that weather to me is when it feels humid, when there are thunderclouds, when we tend to get thunderheads that will stay in this area in the springtime. And just watching for those conditions. We're going through and being able to remove leaves and opening up the fruiting zone when we do have those conditions, and utilizing compounds like sulfur to protect the vines. But also going through, like we were chatting about at the beginning, it's going to be 90 degrees here this weekend. So we're working closely with our team, making sure that we're drinking lots of water and staying hydrated. I know I've got a team of winemakers and marketers coming out to the vineyard next week and ensuring that they are bringing water and sunscreen because it is hot in Eastern Washington and the vines love it. And our team just has to be prepared for it.
Right. And there's not a lot of, shade or tree cover, so you got to be ready for a lot of sun.
Yeah. And then I will say, we always are aware for snakes. So just watching as you're walking through the vineyard, it is the desert. So always paying attention to that. But it's just a fun time of the year. We'll have bloom coming up. Grapes are self-pollinated. So unlike other crops, we don't bring in bees. They'll take care of it themselves. We'll just have to make sure that the vines are not feeling any stress during that time. So if it's hot, I like to think of them as having nice wet feet and make sure the irrigation's on and keep them cool.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, I had a couple other questions before I open it up because if other people have questions, I want them to have an opportunity. But I had a couple more before we get to that point. Because the other thing that I noticed, so you have Sagemoor in general has the selections by Sagemoor, so wines that are made for you all, and or we collaborate with one. We do Miguel the Man from Weinbau. Was sort of a Merlot Cab Franc blend. But then I also noticed that you and Ali Mayfield, who's another amazing winemaker, teamed up to do some white wines. And I was wondering, how much of that did you get to do sort of winemaking cellar decisions? And is winemaking also something that you have a lot of interest in and do like on the side? Or is it more like you've been saying, more of that relationship in the consulting that you do with winemakers in that relationship with Ali?
Mm-hmm. The selections program is so much fun. Being able to partner with winemakers on certain blocks or blends. We've got 3 winemaking partners right now, and it is so much fun getting to really express Miguel's vision of a Weinbau, Cab Franc, and Merlot planted side by side that had never been blended together. And when talking with Miguel and the wine style that we knew was expressive of the site, Chris just came to mind. So working with Ali is so much fun. The Sauvignon Blanc at Bacchus comes from 45-year-old vines. They were 45 years old during our first vintage, expressing from them, but they'll be 50 along with these vines on our screen next year. But these beautiful clusters just express varietally correct Sauvignon Blanc characteristics. There's some really nice star fruit, some tropical characteristics, that jasmine and white flower. And so we're going through and walking the block really bi-weekly. And Ali and I get to go through and taste and really feel the acidity on your palate. That's the fun thing about Sauv Blanc is it can just be very expressive and like a lemon makes your mouth pucker when it's not ripe. But as the acidity softens and balances out, you can really see how that will express nicely. It's been fun to get to work with her on viticulture ideas or harvest decisions and how we deliver the fruit. So we are picking in 2 to 3 ton lots, really small production, but we're able to pick in 50-pound picking lugs. And so those grapes arrive to Walla Walla to our winery, whole cluster with no broken berries, no juice, really no oxygen exposure. So it's been fun to really get to hone in on that. And it can be 80 plus degrees when we're picking that Sauvignon Blanc. And so learning from our team members and winery partners, I've heard from Kent, my boss, a lot of the stories, and I think it was something like 15 or 20 years ago, the first winery brought a refrigerated trailer to the vineyard to ensure their fruit stayed cool. And we added that on as a service for our Sauvignon Blanc. We have a refrigerated trailer at the vineyard where we pick it off the vine. The fruit is anywhere from 60 to 65 degrees, and then we try to suspend time and place it in a cool storage area where we keep it at 45 degrees and try to maintain that freshness.
Well,
So it's been so much fun.
totally. And for those of you not in Washington or aren't familiar with our geography here, it's so crucial to have refrigerated trucks because a lot of the grapes you're sending, or a lot of the winemakers that you're sending grapes to, are 4 hours away in like Seattle or in Woodinville or west of the Cascades. So it's not like a lot of other wine regions where you might be able to harvest your grapes and then just take it up down the road to the winery. Even though there are some wineries out there doing that, but yeah, refrigerated trucks. Where would we be without them? It's a big deal.
Logistics at harvest time is so fun and so important. But then we're like, um, it's one of the first picks of the year. So we are picking those Sauvignon Blanc grapes in early August. And by mid-September, we have dry wine that is ready to be tasted. And I think the 2020 estate white blend was just blended. So it's the instant gratification where these red wines and the wines from these old vines really take their time to come to fruition. But Sauvignon Blanc is so expressive of the place, and it's a fun one because it tastes just like the fruit.
Right, right. Oh, that's so cool. The other thing I wanted to ask you about before opening up is I noticed that you recently joined the Wine Research Advisory Committee, which is part of Washington State Wine. So our Washington State Wine Commission has this advisory committee, and from my understanding, it's basically like a scientific arm of the commission in order to do scientific review, but also look at funding and research proposals for different things that are happening. And so I was just wondering if you could comment on that and how you got involved with that group and what you've been doing there.
Definitely. One thing that's amazing is in Washington State, the Washington wine industry supports industry directed research and part of bottle sales. Anytime anyone's enjoying Washington wine sold here in Washington, as well as fruit sales, a little portion goes to support that research to ensure that we are, as winemakers and vineyard managers, sustainably controlling and managing our natural resources, that we are able to research and learn more about ways to use water conservation, manage pests and diseases. And water conservation is a really fun one where we get to listen to proposals from researchers from all over the United States on different techniques for getting the best amount of water or the drop to the crop. And I really have kind of been involved in the Washington wine industry over the course of my career, either with the Washington wine growers working to do programming for the annual convention for Washington State. And so when I got the opportunity to join the research committee, I was very excited to get the opportunity. It's fun to network and get to know the researchers more and better. We love to not only donate grapes to research, but also partner and do research on our own site. So it's great to have our hands on the pulse.
Oh, it's so cool. Well, I feel like you have your hand on the pulse of a lot of things. Like the other pretty awesome thing was that last year you were named 40 under 40 tastemakers from Wine Enthusiast, which was an incredible thing. We were like, I think there was this collective Washington pride when we saw that, of just like Lacey Lybeck. It was so awesome. And so you're definitely getting recognized for doing all this stuff. Even just talking to you now, I'm just like, you have so much knowledge and you've been doing so much in the industry, but you're still like young. You're still like a young part of the industry. So it's so exciting to see what you're gonna do next.
And I just think it's so fun to well, I was so honored to be on the 40 under 40, first of all, for Wine Enthusiasts. That was so cool. And I just love like inspiring our next generation, for those who are inspiring winemakers and viticulturalists and farmers, really. I mean, so many people, when you think of farmers, you think of my dad rather than me. And I hope we get to change that, because farming is sure a lot of fun.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Well, I was hoping, I know you might have a few more pictures. If you do, feel free to share them. And then also, if people do have questions, I have a feeling I would just sort of like to go past an hour. So, if people are okay, because I feel like there's so many things I want to talk about. So, if you do have questions, um, you can either unmute and wave at me and ask a question, or use the chat box. But Lacey, why don't you? There was one last picture before you got to that part. So if you wanted to show that last one,
Oh
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So fun. So this is just kind of zoomed out from that cluster. So here you can see each of those pieces of the crop clusters before they develop. And Cabernet loves to stand up straight. So you can see this is Cabernet and it's in an active growth phase. And you can tell that by how the neck of the plant is kind of growing ahead of being able to hold itself up straight. It's kind of outpacing itself on growth.
Right. That's so cool. So we do have a question in the chat. Tiffany and Spencer. So they asked, do you know how deep the roots are? So in general, do you have an idea of how far down your vines go?
Mm-hmm. At Weinbau and Gamache, those vineyards were only ever irrigated with drip irrigation. And so when we've pulled out vines, the root ball is something like a beach ball, maybe a little bit larger, and all centered underneath that drip emitter. And so we've ripped out vines, sadly enough, Riesling, drink more Riesling, everybody, that really didn't have very big root systems. But these vines right here were irrigated with sprinklers for quite some time. And back in the day, they would irrigate a lot of water for a long period of time, drive that water down deep, and then not irrigate for a while. And so we've had some irrigation lines break and rinse, blow out some areas where we've seen root systems travel 50 plus feet to the next block. And just interwebbed 5 feet plus down, 1 inch big runner roots. And so this system is just interconnected. I think these roots would just be a massive mat underneath of our feet if you were really able to get down and see them.
Right. Which is another reason not to try to plant new vines, but just to train them down and just keep the whole system all in its own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is fun. It's one thing where if you're trying to slow down growth and control growth, it takes a long time. So we've got to really be able to see the rate of growth that the vines are displaying and forecast where they're going to control how much irrigation we're providing. Because with that large root system, they've got a lot of access to keep them happy if available.
I had another question for you again, because I'm like, great, I can ask some really geeky questions. So in learning about grapevines, what's another cool thing about grapevines is the fact that the bud that turns into a shoot is a 2-year cycle. That it basically the bud forms, like all the buds that are forming here are going to turn into, or like dormant for a season, and then the next year they'll sprout into new growth. And so when you think about vintage variation or issues, or like when you think about the vintage, like 2021, this is what the vintage is like. Is there anything that might affect those buds in a vintage that you don't even realize will affect fruit the following year? Or is there a way to think about it in that way where it's not just about this year's crop and this year's vine, but that each vine is actually sort of representing multiple vintages at once?
Mm-hmm. Definitely, each season builds upon the next one. And so as June and July come and we are leafing and removing shade from those lower areas where those clusters are, it is giving us the benefit of sunlight to the lower buds that we'll prune to next year. Sunlight is part of what helps those buds become fruitful. So we know if we've got a year where we've got excess growth and a lot of canopy, we're going to be spending some extra time. We may need to have more team members during leaf removal just to ensure we get that light penetration to those buds. I think it's an area that we're also going to be doing a little bit more research in. Classically in the winter when we're cutting buds, we're looking at the 3 compound grape buds to see if they're alive or if they're dead. But there is a way to precision cut those buds and see the size and architecture of a cluster already formed within the bud primordia.
Really?
So I wonder if there is some ability to do some crop estimating even before the season begins unfolding.
Wow. I mean, I feel if you figured that out, then you'd win like some Nobel like viticulture award or something if they had a award for viticulture. That's crazy. I didn't. That's so cool. It's
It's
always
always so fun to just predict what it's going to bring, what the year is going to bring.
right. Right. Oh, another question. Yeah, Robin and Mark, do you have a question?
I think you explained it, but I didn't understand. How do you avoid phylloxera in your ungrafted vine?
Definitely. We are fortunate that Bacchus and Dionysus is a very, very sandy site. And classically, that has been the idea that Washington State is just not conducive to phylloxera. They don't like the sandy soil structure. So I would think at some point it's going to be found, but at this time in all of our hunting for it, we have not seen it. Yeah, at Bacchus and Dionysus Vineyard. But
what are some of the disease pressure, or because you'd mentioned powdery mildew, you'd mentioned some of the things, but at the same time, the site, because it's a little windy, you don't have to worry as much as of maybe some other sites. But what it's kind of a two-part question. What other disease or pest pressures do you see the most? And then in terms of old vines, because you have some of the oldest vines in the state, and I know that at a certain point, you need to everyone needs to decide, is this still viable? Is it still economical to keep before you might have to rip them out and plant new vines or plant new things? What types of things are you looking at in your old vine other than yields or pest or disease pressure or anything like that, that might make you decide, okay, it's time to move on to a different planting?
mm-hmm. I'll start with pests and diseases. I'm always looking for bugs that are almost the size of a pin point, so really small bugs in the vineyard, but looking for spider mites. They love dusty conditions, so when it's hot out in the vineyard, being able to look for spider mites out underneath those leaves. What's fun is by reducing our mowing or cultivating a little bit less during July, we can reduce our pest pressure and be able to combat those spider mites. Mealy bugs are another one we're looking for, and we're always monitoring for mealy bugs because they do spread leaf roll, which is a disease in wine grapes. So when you think of a fall harvest shot for wine grapes, quite classically you think of the red leaves glimmering in the sunset, but that's actually a disease that can limit the vine's ability to produce sugar. The old vines at Bacchus and Dionysus do have presence of leaf roll. However, with the very warm site, we've not seen the disease reduce sugar levels to a level that would impact wine quality. So these are still being able to produce 25, 27 degrees of sugar in these grapes, which is exactly where the winemaker would love. Yeah. Knowing that, these vines were sourced before clean plant material was available, we're always just talking with winemakers at the end of the day to talk about the viability of these old vines. We want to make sure that they're economically sustainable, that they're sustainable for us to farm. But we want to make sure that the wines that they're producing are representative of the place and are beautiful and really don't leave anything else on the table that the winemaker is looking for. So having those open conversations, tasting the wines over time, and being able to know whether a block's reaching its performance or whether it is kind of ready to say goodbye. We had to say goodbye to an original planting last year, and it was so hard, but it was a block of Riesling at Dionysus that We just knew that that spot will be much more beautifully expressed as Cabernet and Merlot rather than Riesling.
Yeah. Other than Riesling, is there any other grape or like a favorite of yours or a variety or favorite of yours that you like working with that doesn't get enough attention?
Ooh, probably Merlot.
Mm.
I just think Washington State Merlot has so much more complexity and depth to it than other growing regions in the United States. And they're just beautiful. I love how expressive our Merlots can be.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I love Merlot too, and that's another grape too that always gets a bad rap, and it's unfortunate. But you're right. Washington has very very unique Merlot for sure.
What about you? Do you have any favorite varieties from Washington State?
Grenache and Cab Franc right now are my two varieties that I'm just excited about. It's what I like to drink a lot of too. But I'm starting to get more into different Italian varieties and seeing what people are doing with things like Aglianico or Barbera or any of the other ones that are starting to be experimented with. Just because I love Italian wines in general, and it'd be cool to see sort of how that translates into Washington terroir with Italian varieties.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm interested in. So, well, Lacey, this has been great. I know we usually do keep these at about an hour, so we're about an hour now. But if anyone, was there any other questions? I don't think anyone else had a question, but you just like unloaded so much great information on us. I'm excited to watch this back because I feel like there's a lot of things I should have learned, but I wasn't able to take notes. So this is super super helpful. So thank you so much. So a little preview just for the next 2 weeks. Next week we're doing another. Actually, this is kind of what our last conversation is. We're doing a new varietal support group. So we've done one of these already, but the idea is that you can grab a wine made from a grape you've never had before. It could be some common wine, like if you've never had Riesling, you should totally grab a Riesling so we can talk about Riesling. Or if there's some random Croatian grape or something else, we can grab a wine and we'll just we'll talk, we'll be able to drink a wine, and I'll do the same thing. I'll bring a wine I've never had before. So that's gonna be next week. And then the final week is rosé. We're gonna be talk about how rosé is made. We can talk about where some of the famous rosés of the world are produced. So that's that. But Lacey, thank you so much again for joining us and sharing your pictures and showing us where we're at in the season. And we're just looking so much forward to celebrating with you. Hopefully next year we will do a 50-year anniversary party. So you talk to Kent, I'll talk to Chris and Marty. We'll make it happen.
Definitely. That sounds like a plan. Awesome. This has been so much fun. It's so much fun to talk about Sagemoor and the fine wines produced from Dionysus and Bacchus.
Yes. Oh, love it. Well, as always, the last thing I'd love to do is just, if you wanted to unmute to say goodbye, I always like hearing your voices. Thank you, everyone else. I'll hopefully see you next week. Thanks again, Lacey, and have a wonderful weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Lacey.
Thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you.